Native Americans, A Digital Story by Hannah Price. Native Americans are an oppressed group in America today. Throughout this video presentation, we will explore the history of their oppression, statistics about their current socioeconomic status, how schools have responded to this group, and lastly, how this information relates back to the subjects we have learned in class. The history of Native Americans is something to be remembered. Let's start at the beginning. According to History.com, Native Americans were a group of people that traveled over a land bridge from Asia to what is now Alaska more than 12,000 years ago. The land bridge is now known as the Bering Strait and is pictured in the middle here. Now let's head to the timeline. Due to my amount of time in this presentation, I will not be able to go over every significant topic. For more information on the timeline of Native Americans, please visit History.com and searching Native American History Timeline. Our timeline starts with the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Let us not forget, however, the monumental journey of the Native Americans to the Americas long before his arrival. History.com states, by the time European adventurers arrived in the 15th century AD, scholars estimate that more than 50 million people were already living in the Americas. Of these, some 10 million lived in the area that would become the United States. In 1814, in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Andrew Jackson, along with U.S. allies and Native American allies, attacked the Creek Indians. The Creek Indians ceded more than 20 million acres of land after their loss. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 was signed by President Andrew Jackson, which gave land west of the Mississippi to Native Americans whose land was taken from them. And in 1838, 8 years after the Indian Removal Act had been signed, Native Americans were still living in Georgia. President Martin Van Buren ordered their removal and sent troops down to help them leave. The troops held the Native Americans at gunpoint and escorted them 1,200 miles away from home. More than 5,000 Native Americans died as a result. This is known as the Trail of Tears. In 1879, the first students attended Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Carlisle Indian Industrial School was the first off-reservation boarding school. It was created by Civil War veteran Richard Henry Pratt. The purpose of the school was to assimilate Native Americans to white culture. We'll be talking more about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School later in this presentation. In 1907, Charles Curtis became the first Native American U.S. Senator, and in 1929 he served as the first Native American U.S. Vice President under President Herbert Hoover. And lastly, in 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Indian Civil Rights Act, granting Native American tribes many of the benefits included in the Bill of Rights. The next part of our movie talks about statistics and socioeconomic status of Native Americans today. We will be analyzing two different populations for the sake of clarity and understanding. All of the information seen in this section was found in the 2017 United States Census Bureau. The two different populations we will be analyzing is the Native Americans and the state of Utah. We will start with school enrollment. The percentage of people above the age of 3 that are enrolled in school differs slightly. Other than that, the percentages seem quite similar. In educational achievement, we see a bit more of disparity between the two populations. In the categories labeled less than high school diploma, and also in bachelor's degree and graduate or professional degree is where we see the largest disparity. 19.8% of Native Americans who are aged 25 or older currently hold less than a high school diploma. Compare that to 8.3% of people in Utah who are above the age of 25. And just going back to that last slide, the same type of shocking results is seen in the degree obtained. We can see a bachelor's degree, only 10% of the population, compared to a bachelor's degree in 21.5% of the population. Graduate professional degree 4.7%, graduate or professional degree 11%. This slide shows the percentage of people in the population above the age of 16 and the percentage of those people who are currently in the workforce. The thing I want to point out on this slide is how Utah's unemployment rate is 4.4%, while the unemployment rate for Native Americans is 10.2%. And lastly, I'd like to briefly compare the median household incomes. As you can see, there is more than a $20,000 difference between these two incomes. There are multiple factors playing into these statistics. The point in me showing these is to help us all to gain a better understanding of the current socioeconomic status of Native Americans. Our next chapter is school response. How have schools responded to Native Americans in the past and now? As mentioned previously, there used to be boarding schools set up for Native Americans by white people. Susan Brenna, author of the article titled "Why Are Native Students Being Left Behind?" said about boarding schools, "These schools imposed manual labor and worked to eradicate students' Indianness by teaching that their cultures and languages were inferior." Now, education opportunities for Native Americans are much better. Most Native American students have the option to attend school on or off the reservation. Although both private schools on the reservation and public schools off of the reservations are possibly in need of some work or fixing up, the options available today are better than they have been in any other time in history. So what happens in the classroom today? How can teachers best teach students of Native American descent? Here's a list of teaching strategies a teacher could use in their classroom. Acknowledging each student's unique culture and experiences, incorporating those culturally familiar aspects into lessons, asking familiar adults or role models from the community to come to class and teach students skills, seeking to more fully understand the needs of each student. And lastly, I'll be discussing how this all ties into class. I'll begin with the single story. A concept that we have learned in class is the concept of the single story. Just because we may have a broad understanding of a group, or we have had an experience with a person from a group, that doesn't mean we should generalize that information to an entire group of people. As an example, I know a family of Native Americans. If I were to foster a single story, I would expect the father to maybe have some undesirable traits and possibly have some substance abuse problems, and for the children to not receive a quality education. The family that I know is very educated, and both the parents are heavily involved in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and have competitive high salary paying jobs. Keeping and holding a single story is a dangerous thing to do. My next insight comes from a class reading titled "Cowboys and Indians, Toys of Genocide, Icons of American Colonialism." The author, Michael Yellowbird, happens upon a bag of toy Indians and cowboys in a grocery store. Being of Native American descent, this instance hits him deeply, and he ponders on the meaning behind the seemingly insignificant bag of toys that he stumbles upon. He argues that this is no small happenstance and urges his audience to imagine if this bag of toys was instead filled with Jews and Nazis, or slaves and their slave masters. At the end of this paper, Mr. Yellowbird urges us to be more aware of how these subtle toys and other subtle objects or ideas in society may be influencing us in ways that we are not aware. Next, I'd like to talk about the danger of stereotyping. Stereotypes rarely can tell who a person is. Using stereotypes to define a person is like using butter as a telescope. It does nothing and will only make you confused. When viewing others, we need to make sure and see them for who they are and not judge them by stereotypes. And lastly, here are a couple of examples of Native Americans who have been showcased in the news recently. In the first picture, we see an older Native American gentleman who is beating a tribal drum and singing a song. Before him stands a white teenage boy with a Donald Trump hat supporting the slogan, "Make America Great Again," with a smirk on his face. The first headline accused the young teenager of racism and blatant disrespect. After more videos surfaced, however, more information came into play to show that the young teenager and his schoolmates were trying to stand up for themselves while this older gentleman came and disrupted them. The second picture depicts the opening picture on a terribly sad news article titled "Native American Homicidal Rates Are Soaring, but Causes Aren't Clear Due to Inconsistent Data." This causes one to think, does America continue not to care about a people they have wronged in so many different ways and instances throughout history? That is the end of my presentation. Feel free to stick around for the bibliography.